Good afternoon, viewers, and welcome to Futsal868 Corner Talks. My name is Geoffrey Edwards, series moderator and president of the Futsal Association of Trinidad Tobago. Futsal868 Corner Talks is an online meetup series where global sporting professionals share their experiences and perspectives on the fastest growing indoor sport in the world, futsal. In recent sessions, we expanded to discuss topics of social issues and their relation to sport. Our main objective is to sensitize and educate sports stakeholders on the sport of futsal and other pressing local and global issues. The pandemic has triggered many social issues, amongst them intimate partner violence and family violence deeply rooted in gender norms. On April 23rd, 2020, 146 countries, including Trinidad and Tobago, answered the United Nations Secretary General's call on gender-based violence and COVID-19 and committed to making prevention and redress of gender-based violence a key part of our national and global responses, as well as ensuring that issues of gender equality are treated as essential to recovery. We at Futsal868 has also answered that call. Today, in episode 39, Futsal868 discusses part 3 of the topic, Toxic Masculinity and Gender-Based Violence. Our guests are Mr. Hanif E.A. Benjamin, clinical traumatologist and clinical therapist at the Center for Human Development Limited. And I would also say he is the past chairman of the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. Joining him as well is Mr. Dellison Charles, behavioral therapist at Dellison Charles Holistic Life Coaching Services. I want to say good afternoon to both gentlemen as they join us on this conversation. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Pleasant good afternoon to you, Geoffrey, and thank you for having me. It is wonderful to share the afternoon with both you and my esteemed colleague, Dellison.
Good afternoon, guys. Thank you very much for having me, Geoffrey. And if it is indeed a pleasure. Feeling cold, yo. It is indeed a pleasure to be here. I have a slight migraine, but God is good, and we will push through.
All the time. It's really interesting, gentlemen. The fact that this is the first time I'm speaking to you face to face. And Hanif is a primary school, went to school together in primary school in Marble Boys Anglican. So it's both familiarity and newness. But yet the topic that we are going to speak to and address has inflicted our country for years. But it is very much, as a matter of fact, close to our hearts when it comes to what's happening. And I want to make it quite clear that the Futsal Association of Trinidad and Tobago, Futsal868, is not jumping on any bandwagon. As a matter of fact, this conversation started in December, and this is part 3. God has really been great to us to be able to come at a time and to be able to use messengers such as yourselves to be able to help our country deal with what is happening. And it's also more interesting that I have with me a behavioral therapist as well as a trauma specialist in that of you, Mr. Charles and Mr. Benjamin, simultaneously. And I will start with you, Hanif.
Tell me.
Our country is crying, and I'm gonna, you know it from a long time, Hanif. I'm not gonna put words in my mouth. Some people might say it's political. Some people might say it is not. Whatever it may be, our country clearly is crying. Talk to us from a trauma point of view. What are you seeing? What is, as young people say, what is the ground saying? What are the heads saying from your point of view, sir?
Listen, we, Trinidad and Tobago, have been crying for quite some time. What we are experiencing continues to be a perennial thing, year after year after year after year. And every year it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And in some respect, part of the country has become numb, because that is a trauma response, to become numb after being traumatized for so many times over such a long period. And so we are thrust into this yet again mourning situation of this horrible death of this young girl. And so when you add that to the culmination of all the other situations that we have faced over the many years, we continue, as I say, to be traumatized. We continue to have what I call a trauma response. You see, and I want people to understand when I say a trauma response, because we live in the traumatic incident. And so our lives are then shaped by that trauma that we experience on a daily basis. Now, it is critical for us to understand that there are two types of trauma 1 and trauma 2. Trauma 1 is really something that is immediate, something that happens right now. You left your home and you get into a car accident, much like what happened there. But when trauma 1 meets trauma 2, and trauma 2 is a prolonged traumatic event, then we have what is called complex trauma. And what we are seeing in Trinidad and Tobago today is complex trauma.
The fact that you started it that way.
I am not hearing, I'm not sure.
There was I think there's a slight sticking on his part.
Well, while he sorted out, we could probably continue the conversation.
Indeed, I really am glad that you started the way you started, Hanif, because much of what I do, of course, and I mean our journeys intersect in different ways. But it's interesting that you started with the whole thing about our country responding through trauma and the fact that this has been going on for many years, and I'm always very cautious almost when I engage in these conversations because of a deeper understanding, some people might believe, well, is it that you are cynical or is it that you are numb, to what is going on in society? And I say it's not a matter of being numb, nor a matter of being cynical, but it's just a matter of observing as the society comes into what seems to be a new knowledge of what has been going on all of the time. And I think that, I love to help people understand it. I love to bring it forward and help people understand it from a systemic point of view, understanding that behavior is as a result of beliefs, and beliefs comes out of the events that we've had in our lives. And I like the fact that you said, trauma 1 and trauma 2, because a lot of people think that because I have not experienced it directly, I can't be traumatized by it. But that's not necessarily the case.
You are absolutely right.
Yeah, I tell people, I said, you don't need to be on cocaine to understand the effects of cocaine addiction on our life. You can observe it. You can be the child of a parent who is addicted to it, and you can feel the secondary effects of this trauma, right? So you can be the child of a parent who is addicted to it. All right, so it's really good that we have started on that side, started from this approach.
Well, Dellison, then let me jump in run time to talk about what you spoke about here, which is called vicarious traumatization.
Yes,
and I was extremely excited when the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5 that we use to diagnose mental disorders actually put a place in the DSM that deals specifically with trauma and also with vicarious trauma. And as a nation, as a country, we have been experiencing that over and over. And again, vicarious traumatization is actually feeling the same pain, emotion, as if you, in fact, were the one receiving the trauma. And that is how real vicarious trauma is. And as a country, we have been dealing with vicarious traumatization. And the responses that we see are in line with that of trauma. You see, as if you were in the first hand. And the reason why I bring up the trauma 1 and trauma 2 is because we need to understand it first in order to treat with it. Because a person who is dealing with immediate trauma or trauma 1 is going to be needing a different kind of care to the person who is dealing with trauma 2, which is a prolonged type of trauma. Now, when you look at our society, Dellison, we see so many trauma 1 and trauma 2
cases.
Because trauma 1 brings about a crisis response, and trauma 2 brings about a more cognitive behavioral response. And I'm glad that you brought up the belief and the mind, because I like the tag team in terms of what you do and what I do. Because
absolutely correct.
You see, if you believe it, you think about it, you believe it, you start to feel, and then there is an
embody it, and then you exhibit it. Absolutely correct. So I really believe that, this is, and I was excited to see this connection, because I believe that, as you said, it's a tag team, and I see it, as us we playing a doubles match, and we are standing on the same side of the court, on the same side of the net, playing against the opponent, which is this whole thing of the mystery, or this whole mysterious aspect of what people think is trauma, what people think is abuse and gender-based violence and so on, when, thankfully we are able to help people understand that it's all rooted in the way that you believe, it's rooted in the way that you were conditioned, it has its origins in the things that you would have experienced, and as a result of that, sometimes we see missteps or missed targets when people try to deal with a manifestation without really understanding where has this thing originated from, So it's almost akin to like original pain and so on, where if you don't really understand where something originates from, when you try to deal with what now looks symptomatic, you tell yourself, well, are we really dealing with the real issue, or do we need to do some more work? And so it was it's really good to have us, teaming up on this.
I am smiling because I asked the question. Hey, welcome back, Uncle.
Welcome back, Jeffrey.
I was back for a while, but I will do this. Let me do this. I will only step in when I need to. Gentlemen, This is going to be a first, but I thank you very much for allowing this to happen.
Yeah.
I'm going to step back out of the room, and I'm going to let you all talk. Okay. And I'll just jump in to be able to cut these segments, but I will let you all talk, and you all go ahead and do what you're doing. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
No problem.
Thank you so much for the faith in us.
We feel that
of course, I see it already.
Yes, we appreciate it.
I was going to make the point, the question I keep asking Trinidad and Tobago, can we define the problem? And I think even in gender-based violence, we are trying to solve a problem that have not been defined. I think that there are so many little elements or nuances of parts and parcel and pieces of a wider system or systemic issue that we have not been able to identify. And any researcher would tell you, even in the most basic of research that you're doing, the first thing you have to put there is your research
definition. You have to start with a definition or hypothesis. Yeah.
What is the problem here?
What is your thematic statement? Correct.
Yeah, and the only way we could actually solve an issue is by first understanding what it is we want to solve. And so for a long time, I believe that Trinidad and Tobago have been trying to fix in the red bandage kind of thing, put on a bandage, put on a bandage, put on a bandage.
But have you treated the wound?
Correct. As opposed to really treating the source of why this wound keep opening up. And I want to use the point of Dr. Nadine Burke from Kaiser. Right. And she wrote a book called The Deepest Well, Dellison. And if you could get your hands on that, it would be important.
I will definitely research
Dr. Nadine Burke, The Deepest Well. And what was significant about that book for me is when she talked about treating the children over and over and over for the same thing year after year after year, until she reached a point where she said, but wait, something had to be wrong in the well that they are drinking from. And if nobody is fixing the well that they are drinking from, then we are only going to be reactionary in our approach and giving a Panadol. It's the same concept, Dellison, that we need to understand what are the issues, what is the question that we want to answer, what are the problems that we see. And I have been looking at it. And so we could take a look and see how it's going on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, before we do that, for the sake of the audience, I would like to put up a definition of gender-based violence, because I
Okay.
love what you all are doing. In
Yes.
order for us to solve the problem, we have to do step by step, structure by structure. So
Absolutely correct.
let's give a definition of gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is acts of physical, mental, or social abuse, including sexual violence, that is attempted or threatened with some type of force, such as violence, threats, coercion, manipulation, deception, cultural expectations, weapons, or economic circumstances, and is directed against a person because of his or her gender roles and expectations in a society or culture. A person facing gender based violence has no choice to refuse or pursue other options without severe social, physical, or psychological consequences. Forms of GBV include sexual violence, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, sexual exploitation, early marriage or forced marriage, gender discrimination, denial such as education, food freedom, and female genital mutilation. This came out of the study that was done in Trinidad and Tobago based on the United Nations definition. Gentlemen, with that being said, I step back out of the room and given that context, continue the conversation.
I love that. You see, the thing is, I love the fact that we started with the importance of planting or putting forward a definition, because I believe so in dealing with all of my therapeutic situations and otherwise in any platform, we must start with a definition. And so I love that the conversation is not just rooted on gender-based violence, but it's also connected to this thing called toxic masculinity. And as we said, we are tag teaming here today, right? And I believe that the whole aspect of trauma, especially childhood trauma, connects so much to these manifestations of what we call toxicity in either masculinity or femininity. And today, of course, we're focusing on this thing called toxic masculinity. Now, we know, we know that masculinity has been typically or traditionally framed according to the essence of four things, according to masculine essence being manifested in four ways. And those four ways tend to be: one, that a man is conditioned to have, right? That a man is conditioned to be driven by ambition. He is conditioned to preserve control, and he's conditioned to focus on tasks or to be task oriented. And opposite to that, we tend to have the essence of femininity, which is a woman being conditioned to be, a woman being conditioned to be driven by emotions, a woman being conditioned to preserve connection, and a woman being conditioned to be people focused or people oriented. In other words, it's summarized by saying that masculinity, as it's traditionally defined or as we are socialized to accept it, masculinity has to do with physical strength or physical superiority. Whereas femininity, we are somewhat socialized to believe that femininity is about emotional strength or emotional superiority. So that's why you hear all of these perverted statements like, the women are the fairer sex, but women are emotionally superior to men. And that men are not in touch with their emotions. And then you hear that men are the stronger ones and we are the protectors because we have the physical strength, yet we are inept emotionally, or we are emotionally illiterate. So having this understanding of this essence of masculinity, I believe it becomes toxic when a man feels, this is not generally speaking, when a man feels that his essence is being threatened, which is his essence to have, his essence to be ambitious, his essence to control, his essence to complete tasks successfully. When this essence is being threatened, we tend to see men going down a road of perverting their way of experiencing this fulfillment, this essential fulfillment. They go down a way of perverting that, and we tend to slip into a thing of abuse. And one of the things that I've come to recognize in my research is that men do suffer, generally speaking, suffer from a form of emotional illiteracy, where because men are not necessarily conditioned, or society does not easily or readily promote this socialization of the man to be in touch with his emotions and to be vulnerable and to emotionally communicate or emote. As a result of that, you have a lot of men thinking that when I can't emotionally communicate, and we know that this can originate from, childhood traumas and the experiences that they would have had in their family and the different systems that they would have been exposed to. When a man, it's almost as though when a man who is somewhat emotionally dysregulated, when he feels that he cannot communicate his emotions, or he's not experiencing understanding or some form of relatability, it's almost as though he has to pervert his way to get that, and that tends to slip into an abuse of his essence. And that's where I think that masculinity becomes toxic, when a man tries to pervert his way to achieve or to experience this fulfillment, which is being, having, providing, controlling, achieving. He perverts this essence through abuse. And of course, we know that abuse manifests in different ways. We have the physical abuse, we have the psychological abuse, we have the emotional abuse, and then we have the sexual violence as well. That we have now this, it's almost this perversion of the physical strength or perversion of the physical superiority in order to accomplish his means. What do you think about that, Hanif?
Dellison, I think that you are on point there. And the point that I want to jump off, or you see the social environment. Yes. I keep making the point. Yuri Bronfenbrenner, 1979, spoke about the ecological model. Yes. And in so doing, he helped us to understand that how we socialize interacts with everything. Correct. And so when you talk about how the man has been socialized to be the winner, the this, the that, it then tells you, it sets you up, like literally it sets you up, yeah. to say that this is where you have to be. Correct. And anything less is will not be tolerated. Yeah. So the question that I wrote down while you were talking here is, what level of response then must a man have in order to survive? Because I almost see it like a level of survival. And in my practice, I've seen so many men who come to me for help spoke about what happened to them in terms of getting along that road of violence. And I want to say, people always believe that this violence is something that happens. It doesn't just happen. It is something that is inbred. It is something that is learned. And the response is most time violence. Because when you lack the emotional, as you call it, the emotional
illiteracy.
Illiteracy. Yeah. You have to fight somehow to do what you need to do.
To communicate.
And therefore, how do you then communicate? When you are told that you're no beat, you're dead beat, you're this, you're that, you're the other, and you don't know how to communicate, what then do you do? Now, I want to put a plug in here for both you and I, because of ignorance, a lot of people say, oh, you're condoning violence, right? And I want people to understand that in no way at all we are condoning violence. At the very least, we're not condoning violence. However,
I think we're actually exploring the roots of it.
That is the important thing. Yeah. And I don't think, Dellison, that we have explored the roots enough to bring about the change. And that is why this conversation is so important. Because I want to jump on that social environment, and you talk about a child.
Yes.
Jeffrey Canada, from the Harlem Children's Zone, coined the term the man box in a TED talk he did. And in so doing, he spoke about how we put boys, how you and I were put into this
box, yes,
from a very early age. And that box taught us who and what we should become. That box taught us that our emotions are not important. That box taught us that love and showing love is not important. That box taught us that we had to be rough and tough and rugged in order to survive. That box taught us that we had to be protectors. That box taught us that we had to be in charge of. It didn't say to love and honor. It said to be in charge of. And that man box, Dellison, was given to us by our mothers, by our fathers, by our grandmothers, by our grandfathers, by our uncle and our aunt, and by the school and by the church, by the religious sector, by the government, by society. The man box was given to us as a gift. You know, we always say when you're a child, you never get a book to be a child, or you never get a book to be a parent.
Yes.
The only thing I am certain about is that we were given our box at birth. By the very picture, they say that you must wear blue, you mustn't wear pink. We were put into that man box, and we were given the tools in that man box to become who we are as man. And then when we have become that man, you are then punished for it.
You know, I love the fact that it was coined as the man box, because we understand it as well in psychology as it being related or akin to systems theory. And the fact that a lot of people think that a man or an individual is developed by some random process. And as a result of that, you have now what we are seeing in the society as a manifestation or an exhibition of perennial issues, right? We are having a lot of people now saying, but where does come from? Or where that come from? But when we understand that nothing exists in a vacuum, nothing is developed in a silo, because of that, we can easily trace it back to the roots of or to the origin. So basically you're seeing a person who has become abusive, you're seeing a person who has become emotionally dysregulated, and we can trace it back to the systems, right, or to the systemic environments in which this person has been exposed. So you ask yourself, what quality of family were you raised in? Was there a spirit or a system of accountability in this family? Were wrongs called out? Were you exposed to abuse as a child? Not necessarily having received abuse or being a victim of abuse, but did you witness abuse within your family homes? Does your family have a spirit or a spirit of collective denial in it, which we will come to later on when we talk about this whole expansion of gender-based violence and why it is so passively tolerated in our society? Is because we have this whole thing of collective denial existing and running very rampant in our societies. So that's in the family. And then we think about the church, where the church now tells you that a man has to be, that a man should become. And then you have your friends, you have these social circles, school, and so on, who, if you exhibit anything outside of this man box, outside of this traditional definition, you are victimized or villainized for it. And you know, while you were talking, something came to my mind, and I had to write it down, and I said that I would mention it, and that is something that runs rampant in our society, and that is the feminization of emotions.
Yes,
So
sir.
when emotions are feminized, when it is seen to be female or feminine, to feel vulnerable, to have a low day, to want affirmation or validation, to want some physical connection, to want quality time, and so on. When we feminize these things and think, well, this is only for women, then you have a lot of young men, boys, adolescents, and now young adults growing up into these persons who have been emotionally deprived, emotionally starved, and unable to communicate. And my favorite, my phrase, which is the emotional illiteracy. You reinforce this emotional illiteracy because they are afraid of being defined by society, which ironically has outlined for them the path that they should have gone. So society tell you to be this way. It tell you to be this way, to be ambitious, to strive, to be task driven, to succeed, to control, to own, and so on. But then when you don't get the emotional satisfaction that you should get from it, and you now have a desire to communicate this feeling of unfulfillment, this feeling of wanting a validation, this feeling of just wanting to be needed, to be seen, to be loved, but then that is feminized now. So the same society that told you to go this route is the same society now that comes back and tells you, hey, no, you can't show emotions because you're being feminine, and then you now engender the spirit of homophobia, which is a whole other topic, right? So you have this homophobic sense running parallel against this predetermined definition as to what a man should be. And then when a man now is kind of stuck in this realm, it goes back to the perversion of one's essence. It's like, what do I do then to get the attention? That I need this thing. Let me abuse my way through it.
And
this
then,
is if I may, Hanif, just hold a point. And so we're going to take a quick break because we want to. I'm wearing my red to celebrate Valentine's Day, but it's very interesting because we're talking about the man box from Hanif's standpoint.
Yes.
And from your standpoint, you brought in love.
Correct.
But the interesting thing is, you'll see it soon that we have a religious quote as we celebrate love. So then my question to you coming back after this break, this quick one is, how does love fit into the man box that Hanif spoke about? And how do we teach our young boys to love? We'll be right back. You're watching Futsal868 Corner Talks on a Sunday with Mr. Benjamin and Mr. Dellison. Mr. Charles, we'll be right back. Don't forget to be able to join our movement and our revolution. Futsal868 Corner Talks.
You will not be able to stay home, brother.
We are about love. We are about a revolution. We are about doing it right. So as the quote said, Hanif, as the quote said, Dellison, love is kind, love is not boastful, etc., etc., etc. I see you shaking your head, Hanif. I see you shaking your head. And today being Valentine's Day, we are now supposed to, as men, we are supposed to shower our companions, our ladies.
Who said that? Who said that?
You know,
who said that?
Well,
Why
what
can I be
showered?
Why can I be showered?
It's a good thing that I go and step out of the room.
You know.
Oh Lord.
Go ahead, guys. Go ahead.
Thank you.
I want to jump in there with that whole concept of love.
Let's go. Let's do it, please.
Too often I have seen over and over, Dellison, where this love is conditional,
Yes.
and not conditional love. There's a difference between having conditional love and having love that is conditional.
Yeah.
And that condition that is placed on love is based again on that box, on that way we were cultured. You see, and so I remember one client who, as a grown man, is struggling because of what you call that selective love that was given to him by his father, because he was not an outside boy. He was an inside boy who liked to read and write and draw and paint and sing and dance. And the father told the mother, that is not my son. My son is no sissy.
Because those things have been feminized. But we come
correct. And that is why I'm bringing it up, because of what you said.
The feminization,
Yes, every emotion now is seemed to be and have been thought to us as a woman thing, And if you were to deviate from that, you were called names to the point where you're bringing your child to therapy because you find he needs this, or you ostracize your child because they are not as strong or as what, again, the man box that you gave to them, they are not living up. And so you have love with condition. I love you in a butt. Love you in a butt. And that is how it goes. And so when we consider the man, the love, the family, we need to understand why is there a break in transmission between the two. Why it is a father seemingly cannot really embrace his family from a love perspective. Why his only role seemed to be a provider. And if there's challenge in that area, he's emasculated, he's embarrassed, he's run, he's shunned from everything and everyone because he's not a provider. I want to make one point before you jump in, Dellison, here.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to go to a barber in South on a Sunday evening.
Right.
And Barbershop always loud, just really loud. But this barbershop was loud and vile, always cussing and carrying on and thing. And I always say, oh God, I ain't coming back. Every week I ain't coming back. But the haircut used to be good.
Yeah, can you say be good?
Yes, I used to go back, right? And so, but one day, I decided to just pay attention, a little attention. Dellison, it's therapy that men was having therapy there, you know. They were having a moment of raw human emotion as a man.
Yes.
Where they were able to say what their wife didn't tell them, how they felt, what they didn't feel. I mean, but of course, you're saying it very colorful. So when I removed the color from what was being said, it was pure human emotion that was bottled up that these men were trying to get out of their chest. And so you have to understand that these men, or men in general, this box that we are to live by, we now find places and spot to express ourselves. You see, that is why they congregate at the bar.
On the block.
You see, that is why they congregate on the block. For those of us who are sport inclined, you congregate on the football field. You know, you take a sweat. I see you have a hand up. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Your thing, you know.
I tell all that what's going on coming on. So we have from our studios, we have a guest who said many men put that on themselves. Not every woman makes them providing demands.
He's providing demands.
He's providing demands. Thank you very much to Soul Soprano, Ms. Sylvester, for your comments. I will let the panel continue to speak, but gents, just take a note of that comment that I think another woman will be sharing as we go along. I step back out
I
again.
want to jump in, and then Dellison could go further on that. And my response to that is that woman didn't have to put the pressure on the man. Society already did that for her.
Thank you for saying that, Hanif. Let me tell you why. Thank you for saying that. Because one of the things that I love to work through with clients and friends and loved ones is that when we have this complaint about what society is, I love to gently remind us that we are society.
Correct.
When we change what is normal, norms are changed in society. When we accept what is promoted to us as a norm, then that behavior becomes normal, right? It's interesting that you talk about the barbershop, because as an analyst of human behavior and a thinker and a listener, sometimes when I go into a social space, it is virtually impossible for me to turn off or to shut off. So, and as a speaker of several languages as well, my listening senses are very, very heightened. I just can't not hear or can't not observe. So when you go into the barbershop in particular, I always remember as an adolescent having a particular conditioning, and recently I did a talk on mentions, TT, where I would have spoken about having, being defined by this dichotomy of being a bright boy but being a ghetto boy, right? So with that now, most of that street smarts was acquired when I went to the barbershop. And I remember going to the barbershop as an adolescent and listening to the conversations, and to me in those days it felt very normal. It felt very okay. Well, this is how the fellas talk, and this is how they refer to women, they objectify women, or they use a lot of cursing and all these different things. And then as I became older and I started to go now, in times when you now have acquired certain knowledge, you're operating within a realm of a certain wisdom, you can go now and you can hear the deeper things that are being mentioned or being communicated below what you call the colorful language. So when you hear some of the retaliations, or what might be perceived as a retaliation, what might be perceived as being obscene or as an obscenity, you really listen to an emotion that has been suppressed for quite a long time. And interestingly, especially with men, contrary to popular belief, men do communicate emotionally now. But for a man to communicate emotionally, he will only do it in a space that he determines as being safe. Now, I know a lot of women who have come to me and they say, well, I do all that I need to do to make my man feel safe. I know mothers who would say, I have provided for my son, I have done my best to raise him. He didn't have a father, and I have done my best. And I say to them, can a man become a man without the example of a man? It's highly
Ooh,
unlikely to
boy.
so do. It's highly unlikely to so do. So
Mm-hmm.
I think what happens, especially when we look at the systemic analysis, right? This thing about love is truly conditional because the society tells you, I will reward you, I will
Mm-hmm.
applaud you if you behave a particular way. Circumstances will be fair to you. Things will be generous to you, favorable to you if you do things in a certain way. So it's almost as though we set up a psychological and emotional status quo. And
Mm-hmm.
if a man should deviate from this psychological status quo,
Lose.
it's almost as though there is no safe space for him to exist with his vulnerability. And going back to my original point, when a man does not feel safe to exist in this vulnerability, if he is not able to get the help or he is not open to receive the help because he cannot find a safe space, what he does then in this space in which he feels forced to exist is that he goes down into this perverted realm or this perverted level of abuse, having to kind of abuse and pummel his way through to get attention, to get back this
Mm-hmm.
control. So sometimes when you hear somebody using excessive obscenities and so on, and somebody say, I can't listen to that because you're cursing too much. Again, not
Right.
excusing the behavior, but I say if you would filter out the obscenities and listen to pay attention to what is not being communicated verbally, pay attention to what is being communicated in the body language, then you're able to understand the deeper message. And that is that a lot of men feel emotionally deprived, not feel, a lot of
Yeah.
men are emotionally deprived, are emotionally starved. They are emotionally and psychologically scarred because at a younger, more tender age, and as Hani specializes in with children, when they would have been seeking this validation, when they would have been trying to tap into a different level of development, trying to access their emotions and so on, they are being told by the persons who they esteem as being in authority, the persons who they are told are in authority, the persons who they were conditioned that they have to listen to, whether it be a pastor, whether it be a priest, whether it be a father, whether it be a teacher, whether it be a big brother or your older neighbor on the block, you have been conditioned by society to listen to these persons. So it's almost as though if you believe something differently, if you are inclined to a different thing, you are either emasculated or you are branded as being effeminate because
Mm-hmm.
you can't exist comfortably in this new realm. Now, interestingly, there's a thing as well in psychoanalysis called tetramapping. And
Mm-hmm.
tetramapping tends to develop the human being or tends to split the human being into four quadrants. So we talk about the earth quadrant, the air quadrant, the water quadrant, and the fire quadrant. And interestingly, these quadrants, exist on you being a left brainer or you being a right brainer. But
Right.
when it pertains to your behavioral responses as well, these quadrants tend to almost give a kind of predictive analysis. And what this psychology says is that as a man, we are more inclined to be earth, which represents control and domination and ambition, and fire, which represents creativity and doing and performing. So we have
Mm-hmm.
a man being dominated or defined by being earth, ambition, domination, control, and fire, which is creativity, performance, and showmanship. And then you have it telling you that women are traditionally defined as being either air, which is logic, clarity, and analysis, and water, which is emotions, empathy, and connection. So
Wow.
interestingly, when I would have done this tetra mapping the first time, this was when I used to live in Mexico in 2013. I did this tetra mapping, and I was told at that time that I am water fire. So I said, okay, water fire. At that time, I did not understand its real connection to this whole thing of gender definition and gender development and identity development. And so looking at it, I was defined as being water, which is having the ability to access emotions and to be empathic, and fire, which is having this creativity and this showmanship and the performance.
Mm-hmm.
So I said,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this is very interesting. When my professional circumstances changed, I went in again and I did the tetra mapping, and I was then defined as being water, which is empathic, emotional ability, having ability to connect, and earth, which is ability to control, to be dominant, to be a leader. And something interesting that I've observed about myself is all throughout my development, and now as a practicing therapist, all through my development, I have always been balanced, so to speak. So I have always been able to identify with the guys, either through being a showman, through being a performer, through being popular and getting this attention. But then I have never ever changed my ability to access emotions and to identify with so. Much to my surprise, when you listen to the wider society being talked and this message being perpetuated, that being emotionally accessible and being vulnerable, they having this thing defined as it being a feminine trait. So I said
Imagine.
to myself, am I going to sacrifice this, what is referred to being a feminine part of me, just to satisfy the society's definition of what a man is supposed to be? And because I have remained very faithful to protecting my ability to access emotions and to emotionally communicate, I am now able to understand the cry of a female when she's crying out for respect and she's crying out to be understood and to be identified with. But I can also identify with a male being emotionally deprived, being emotionally starved, and not knowing how to reconcile his emotions. So I think that when we understand this box, this socialization, this conditioning, which tells you that a man can get love, and this love is not necessarily love as we Valentine's Day tell us, but this love comes in the form of validation. It comes in the form of affirmation. It comes in the form of acceptance. It comes even in the form of understanding. When we understand that this love does exist in the society, but men are not necessarily able to access it because they're afraid to get vulnerable to go there, because society tells them, if you deviate from what we have put forward for you, gifted you in this man box, we will withhold this love from you. So it's either you do, and when you do, you receive. Or if you don't do, you won't receive, but ironically, you'll still be criticized for behaving in a manner that is affected or impacted by your not having received. What do you
So
think?
if I may jump in here, gents, quickly and ask a question, because I see that we may be going into some extra time, so bear with me because I find this going nice. So both Hanif and Dellison, if it is we go to extra time, I know somebody might have to go to a little dinner afterwards, but give me a little 15 minutes extra now, please. But we have the situation now where a lot of females are running scared. A lot of females are running scared because of our men. We have a lot of men who are termed monsters. Even in greeting men, when we were growing up, was what is he seeing, dog? Now, in greeting a man is, that is my monster. Right? Okay. We have now, what can we do? Dellison and Hanif, what can we do to teach our men to love and to teach our women to respect? That is one. And there's a brilliant question that came just before you mentioned it. That came from, again, sorry, let me just put it up here. Soul, what are some things that helps promote a space where men can be vulnerable with the women in their lives? And that question actually popped up just before you finish your conversation, Dellison. So those two questions I want to ask as we try to get solutions to getting our men not seen as monsters anymore, or even greet each other as a what you seeing dog, what you seeing monster, and getting our women to respect us. So we as men to love, our women now to respect.
And
Gents, it's out to you. It's back to you.
And if you go first.
Yeah, because I'm listening to this and I'm saying what we are asking for is the proverbial removal of the man box. What we are, in order for the woman to not be afraid, and in order for the man to, you see, because I don't know if men are not respecting, I think men are responding to what they know, how they know it, and what they consider to be the masculine way of doing things. You know, when I come to you, I want to shake hand, how you going, sir? That is foreign. Where you seen dog, monster, killer, you understand? I see the new thing now is king and those kind of things. So we again have to understand from a 360 approach. And the reason why I say 360 approach is because we have been looking at things from a 180 degree. And a 180 degree in most time deals with the woman, but in actuality, it deals with the aftermath of gender-based violence and stuff like that. So you're talking about the shelter, the this, the that, the other, which is very important. But what I say we need to look at is a 360 approach where we are taking into account the man, his emotion, the woman, her emotion, and how they intermingle and intertwine, which is causing or may cause challenges. If we keep operating on the premise that we have to protect the woman, provide more shelters, build more this, deal with that, then we are not dealing with the other part of the coin that we cannot live without, which is the man. Even if the man get locked up and he go in jail for 6 months or 3 months, when he comes out, we still have to deal with the man.
Correct.
And therefore, I believe that we have to change the way we look. We have to change the lens in the way we look at man and woman. And that lens has to change from baby. And we have to create that 360 approach where we are encouraging men to be man, but not from a societal a machismo type of way, but to understand human nature, to understand love, to understand compassion. We have to teach boys how to behave while we teach them about respect and love, not control and power. And then we have to teach our girls to respect our boys and our men. And I say that without any form of holding back, because a lot of people don't like to hear this. But when you look at that 360 approach the way I do, you see a situation where a lot of situations are aggravated, either willingly or not, but the situation is aggravated, and therefore I go back to the emotional illiteracy. Because I'm emotional illiterate and I cannot respond to what you are coming to me with, because I will deal with it. You see, because a woman comes from an emotional perspective and a man cannot battle. So you're coming like this, the emotion coming, but because I don't know, I'm emotionally illiterate, I cannot understand you. And herein lies the problem. If I cannot understand you, I cannot communicate with you. And if I cannot communicate with you, I cannot solve the issue. So I respond with what I know. And the reason why I say we respond with what we know is because if all my life I have been taught that this is the way, then that is what I will do. And so in order to answer that question in terms of how do we stop men from being this, remove the divide. Accept that what you call it, earth, wind, and fire and air.
Earth, wind, fire, and air, correct.
Right. What is the terminology you call it?
Tetra mapping.
Right. We need to fully understand tetra mapping and allow men to be a wind and a water.
Correct.
Yeah. And so don't take it away from him. Let me tell you something, Dellison. I remember most cases when the bacchanal start with the man and the woman, all of a sudden the man private part shrunk. Just so. After years of it shrunk. Oh, you can't do nothing. And just, I mean, you're talking. So you're attacking emotionally one time. Bam. You see, or you're not a good father, or you're not a good provider. Those are the kind of emotional attack that you get. And so if we understand the 360, Dellison, if we understand and we remove the barrier between a man and a woman and just have a person who live their best life with who they are and without reservation, then we remove this level of violence. We remove this demand had to respect. No. I saw a post on Facebook, Dellison. I was shocked, and nobody responded to the post. You know why? It was outside the box. A woman said, "Could you all stop treating me as if I'm an invalid?"
Hanif.
That she said in response to all of what is going on here. She said, "I understand the girl died. It is horrible. It is tragic. But could you all stop speaking as if I am not in the room and you all need to plan some protection for me and I am incapable?" That's what the woman said. And I applaud her for that.
You know, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because it reminds me of a session that I had with a client last week, Monday, when we were discussing in the wake of, Andrea Barrett just having been, she was just discovered, her body was just discovered and so on. And there was the outrage and the uproar on social media talking about pushing this narrative of protect our women. And I remember asking her, I said, how do you feel about this term, protect our woman? She says, first, in not so many words, she said, first, it assumes that I need to be protected.
Boom.
Right? And then I said, why are we saying protect our women when we should be saying respect our women? So when Jeffrey said that, we have to teach men to love and teach women to respect, I think that applies on both sides, because not only do men need to know how to respect, and it is definitely so, because as I maintain, the greatest explanation for bad behavior is still not an excuse for bad behavior.
Correct.
So even if you can rationalize and justify all of the things that you do, the abusive things that you do, it still does not excuse you, and it still points out a problem that is deeper within you that needs to be treated. Nevertheless, I think that we really need to change this protect our women to respect our women, but more so coming from a male perspective, we also need to teach men how to respect, but that teaching men how to respect comes through a process of emotional intelligence or emotional education, which comes, as we have been talking about, the proverbial removal of the man box. So when we can stop conditioning men to believe that they should be emotionally unavailable, that they should focus only on achieving and being ambitious and having and being in control, and being understood as opposed to seeking to understand. Because the opposite of that is that we tell men, be understood. You show up in this world and be understood. But conversely, we condition women to show up in this world to understand, seek to understand. So you have now the man traditionally wanting to be understood and the woman traditionally seeking to understand. I also love the fact that you mentioned, we need to remove this barrier, the feminization and the emasculation of certain, through certain things. And it's interesting when I'm working with couples, especially couples that may have toxicity or dysfunction in it. One thing I like to do first is to degenderize this whole thing of toxicity. So very often you see them come into a space and they say, the man is toxic and I can't deal with him. And I ask the woman, I said, are you toxic in any way? And then she would be like, toxic? Some women might be like, toxic, what do you mean? As though toxicity does not exist for females. But I want to put it plain on this platform today, that it's not necessarily about toxic masculinity or toxic femininity, because we understand that these things exist. But I want to say that when toxicity is present in a relationship, and this is not necessarily a romantic relationship, this could also be parent to child. When toxicity is present in a relationship, we have now both man and woman defaulting to and responding through what they have been conditioned to do. So let's look at how that plays out. Hanif said that when there is toxicity and when there's an argument, we have the woman now coming to do what? To berate the man, to nag the man, to emasculate the man, to attack the man. And that's because what women have been conditioned to be superior in, which is their whole thing about, this emotionality and being emotionally literate. We have women now going to an abusive place, not everybody, we'll be speaking in general here, but we have some women now going to an abusive place and they are using what they are good at in order to be understood and get back this control. which is to verbally aggress, which is to psychologically break down, because women can break down men as well, because they, especially when a man shares his vulnerability with a woman, again, we are not excusing bad behavior, but we are seeking to provide this framework in which people can understand the deeper roots. So when you have now this thing of,
Dellison, if I may, I just want to ask a
yes,
quick question. I jumped in here quick. Some people might ask, what did Andrea Barrett do to her killer or killers? You understand? To cause that level of gender-based violence
okay,
to her, right? Some people may ask the question, what did Ashanti Riley do to her husband? What did Suzette Sylvester do? The teacher battered to death. What about the nurse who was attacked with a hammer? And the reason we didn't mention her name because she's still a survivor. Some people
I
might
can
ask
answer
that
the question.
question with all those, and I'm doing this so that I don't want anybody to leave this part 3 saying that Mr. Benjamin and Mr. Charles did not speak to our women or did not speak to the people who inflicted the final blow that led to death or the final blow that led to a survivor. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Can I start on this?
You can start on this one.
I want to be very clear. And the reason why I want to be very clear is I want to go back to where I started in terms of, do we know what is the problem? And whether or not the killing, the brutal attack on these females, especially the last female here, was in fact gender-based violence? Or was it what it was, a brutal murder and attack and a murder? You see, I want you, we put in everything in the basket. We put in, if you go back to the definition that you read for gender-based violence, it's not just about a man killing a woman or a man beating a woman or a woman beating a man. We have to understand when it is that and when it is what it is. And in this case, it was a sadistic, violent attack on a human being. And I don't want us to lose that point. And that human being who attacked this other human being could have been a man or a woman. I'm just saying. So if it was a woman who attacked, what then would we have called it? We need to put everything in its category. This horrendous attack happened by a sadist, a person with severe psychological trauma that we have no inclination of. And it doesn't excuse what the person did. But I want to be clear that what is gender-based violence? When you have a relationship or something and you have that violence in there, then we could talk about gender-based violence. But on the other hand, what we have is a murder. What we have is a killing. And that is what it is. So we need to be able to separate the two in order to know what type of treatment. That is why I'm hearing people in the community, albeit correct, outcry, we need to make changes. But if you ask them change for what, they don't know change to do what. Because they are not sure what exactly is the definition of what is going on. And so we need to be very clear that gender-based violence is something very different to somebody who have a random act of murder. And or if there were multiple murders, then you know what we call that.
I'm so glad that you said that, Hanif, because when Jeffrey asked the question, the first thing that came to my mind to contribute is the fact that abuse and this tendency to abuse is fully the liability or fully the responsibility of the abuser. This is a problem that resides within the abuser, right? So I always say the greatest temptation is still not an excuse to sin. And if you were to apply that principle to what people might be misdiagnosing in society, still there is no thing that a woman can do to make a man kill her, physically abuse her, or aggress her. There's and I know that we can agree and we both can stand confidently on the platform saying that we are not here to re-victimize, because victim shaming, victim blaming, and re-victimization is something that ironically our society does, when indeed, based on the things that we have premised here today, our society is responsible for the development of men, as some of the men as they are, especially an abusive man. Because the other thing relevant to this conversation is the fact that abusers tend to have allies, and sometimes these allies are not necessarily just friends and family, but these allies can also be systemic in terms of it being the police, the legislative system, and that's an entirely different conversation. But if we are relating it to gender-based violence, I agree with you that we do need to define very clearly when an act is perpetrated in society. Is this indeed a gender-based act of violence, or is this just a manifestation of the evil that exists in our society? We are not explaining it away, but we are premising it this way because if indeed a woman would to have been the driver of this vehicle, accompanied by other women who did what they had to do to this girl and dispose of her body, would the outcry be the same? When we have men being kidnapped, men being robbed, beaten, and their bodies being dumped off a precipice, do we have the same outcry in society of it being a gender-based act of violence? And so with that, it's almost as though there's a level of hypocrisy that exists in our society, but it's inbred because it's systemic, because it goes back to the whole thing of the socialization. So I am maintaining that no abuse can be the fault of the victim.
Correct.
I know that men and women respond, and they respond exhibiting certain behaviors which have been developed over a period of time, which is connected to their childhood traumas and otherwise. And so repeated habits become a behavior which becomes a pattern or a lifestyle. So when you see a man, let's use what we putting in reference here. When we have a man moving from partner to partner, abusing over and over, it's not the partners that have the problem, but it's the man. Something is inherently wrong with the man. And this opens up the discussion to that if we have a woman who has changed partners, but she is still allowing or embracing the same level of treatment from different persons, one woman, not several women, but one woman now can see herself in this example where she would have allowed herself, or she's now allowing herself to receive treatment or accept treatment from a partner because of some form of dysfunction within her, maybe low self-esteem, insecurity, a weird conceptualization of what it means to be a supportive partner and what it means to be submissive. And so she can allow herself to receive different things. Nevertheless, the act of aggression against another human being, we do need to one, it's wrong. One is not right. No man has the right to take the life of another person. So I want to put that out there clear. That's my position on it. At the same time, in the spirit of what we're discussing here this evening, it's important for us to go back to the roots. And part of going back to the roots is defining, as Hanif and I have done at the start, we have to define, is this an act of gender-based violence? Or is this just a manifestation of the evil and the sadism that exists in our society? Because persons do wrong because persons do wrong, And what is interesting here? What is interesting is when we see this level of hypocrisy in society where the same persons who cry out against wrong and cry out against some manifestation of evil in the society find it very justifiable when it comes to the things that they do that they know to be wrong. And I tell people this whole spirit of this whole culture of enabling, this whole culture of being an ally, and being an ally to social ills and to certain evils that we have in society. this culture is based on hypocrisy. Because why is it okay for you to break a red light? Why is it okay for you to drive on the bus route? Why is it okay for you to be engaged in an illegal financial ring? Why is it okay for you to, and it can be something as simple as, why is it okay for you to continually sign into work as early when you are wrong and you have friends who are supporting you in this? Why is it
Correct.
okay for you to do these ills? You know, why is it okay for you to send porn in a chat? Why is it okay for you to objectify the same woman that now we're holding a candle and protesting in tongue and saying, don't kill those women, but you have basically killed these women psychologically and emotionally because you are reconditioning your fellow men to objectify women and to degrade a woman. So when it starts there, we understand now what is manifested in society is just representative of a greater evil. Honey.
But Dellison, let me jump in here because you see, I'm going back to the emotional literacy, you know.
Yes.
And I remember I was having a conversation with a legislator, and I said to him, you cannot legislate emotions. You can teach people how to manage emotion. And I say this because when a man could kill a woman, or when a woman could kill somebody and sit down and wait for the police to come and go and is prepared to go to jail, then no amount of legislation can help that person. It is about the mind. It is about how you see life. It is about how you understand life. And the reason why I'm saying that is I don't see, as everybody is seeing, you know, it's protect our females, protect our females. I am seeing protect our humans.
Yes.
Protect our humans, because Dellison, we are killing each other at a rapid rate, man, woman, and child. And
Yes.
anytime we begin to segregate, protect our man, protect our man, protect our children. Well, I say protect our children because they are vulnerable. They can't really go out there and protect themselves.
Correct.
But for me, if we remove that line that separates man and woman, and we see human
beings as one race.
Human being.
Correct.
Then we are able to see love as human beings. We are able to see hurt as human being, respect as human being, and
trauma as human being.
Correct. And how I respond to my trauma shouldn't be different or banished or looked down upon because I'm a man. And how you respond to your trauma as a female should be any different. You respond based as a human in your own sphere. And too long, we have genderized this whole killing. We have put a color on the killing, either pink or blue. We have put a call on the thing. Look at the way we are carrying on about the president of the Republic of Trinidad Tobago, a woman no less.
Yeah.
You understand? And so when I say people, emotional illiteracy is a real thing, and I learned the proper term today from Dellison. Yes. And I'm saying if we are to save our people, our Trinidad and Tobago people, remove that line. And all we should see is a human being. And when we do that, the killing either on either side of the spectrum become wrong either way, and we protect one another. We're not going to protect women only or men only. We protect one another. And then what I want to say here too is that understanding that differentiation between gender-based violence and the status.
And violence.
And violence. Violence in Dellison, we are violent society. We are violent society, whether we want to believe it or not. Yes. And so we perpetuate violence. We encourage violence. And then when we act out the violence, we are then shocked that these people are violent. No, we learn that this is how we are to respond. And therefore, when we are looking at the tapestry of life, we have to consider all of us, because when you look at the men, when you look at the female, when you look at the children, we all need protecting, but from one another. We are to be our brothers and sisters keeper. It is not be the keeper for your sisters only, or for your brothers only, or for your children only, but we protect all and sundry.
I love the fact that you're talking about the degenderization, because it is necessary. You know, just like this thing, as we said, this concept of toxic masculinity and toxic femininity, when it's just toxicity.
First
This
up.
thing of gender-based men acting violently against women and not necessarily considering or esteeming as being dysfunctional and dangerous. The same thing of men acting violently against men or females acting violently against females. That even opens the discussion for what happens when a man goes to the police station and says that I am being physically abused by my significant other who happens to be a female. What happens to the society? They laugh at you. The police officer say, boy, big man like you, you's a sissy or what? You's a girl. Why you allowing she to beat you? And these different things. So now you have, even if a man tries to break the mold and tries to reach out for help, saying that I am being abused by a female, what we're saying here is that the outcry is not the same. So we have to degenderize toxicity. We have to now create a system of accountability. And I believe that that starts from authenticity. Last night I did a talk on self-love and authenticity. And so I was showing to the people that if we struggle first to love ourselves, and that struggle to love yourself comes from not just a lack of authenticity, but akin to what we are talking here today, it comes because we have been exposed repeatedly to systems that do not support this vulnerability. And it pushes the narrative of a particular conditioning. When we understand that we have to protect each other and not just protect the woman alone, because when you put forward the narrative, protect women, what it says then is men can afford to be unprotected. Because my thing is, if men are the protectors of women, who are the protectors of men? You understand what I mean? Right? And if women are called to respect men, or if women are called to love men, then who's loving women? So it goes back now to not just respecting the other person, but respecting yourself, not just loving the other person, but loving yourself. And that comes through emotional intelligence and education, which is the direct opposite of emotional illiteracy. And I am challenging all of our organizations. I am challenging all of our systems. I am challenging each one of us who is listening today, who will look at this program at a later time. I'm challenging everybody to enter into a system of authenticity and accountability, especially the accountability, because that is where it starts. When we see it manifest, what has happened to Andrea, Ashanti, Shannon, and so many other females that have really suffered the acts of violence that we have coined or that we have classified as being gender-based violence? What has happened to them is just a snapshot or a microcosm of what is occurring in the wider society. Because my thing is, what happens when boys, men, are also on the receiving end of gender-based violence? Where's the outcry? Where's the outrage? It's not there. So it goes back to, I am challenging persons to interrupt this pattern of no accountability and interrupt this system of alliance where we protect abusers, we protect dysfunctional behavior, we perpetuate emotional illiteracy by telling men what they're supposed to be and telling women how they're also supposed to behave. I've heard people say to victims of violence, whether it be gender-based violence and otherwise domestic abuse and so on, I've heard persons telling women, girl, you're not supposed to answer back. When he talked to you, you're supposed to, you're not supposed to answer back. I have heard mothers telling young girls, telling daughters, if he don't, he only lashing you because he love you. That's how he does show. Like your father used to lash me, and I know that he loved me. So if your boyfriend is lashing you, he loves you. And this now speaks to the perpetuation of myths and the perpetuation of misinformation
and violence.
and violence because of incorrect socialization. So it goes back down to holding society accountable. And the reason why I can speak generally as in holding society accountable, because every single person is society. So now we are challenged now to rock back and introspect and say, what is it that am I accepting? As a man in a group chat, when I see my brothers sending porn, and objectifying women and talk about, look how she's skin up here and look how this thing looking here. And when we sit silently and just allow this to happen, we have to ask ourselves, what is this perpetuating? Right? When we are on the block or when we are in the barbershop and we hear somebody crying out for some attention or somebody crying out for something, do we say, that is not my business, that's not my affairs, and I move forward? When we pass in the street and we see two people having a heated exchange, you know, and we hear a woman emasculating a man through verbal abuse, what do we say? Do we videotape it and send it and let it go viral?
And we laugh, we laugh
at it. Or do we interrupt the pattern and say, this is unacceptable? And so
Dellison,
yeah, so when we, let me just conclude here. When we start to be authentic and we start to hold others accountable, more so holding ourselves accountable, we change the norms in society, and this behavior will no longer be normal. Go ahead.
And so it speaks to what I spoke about, the ecological model, the system. And the system need to be responsible. Correct. Because the religious system have a way in which it treats with men and gender and the roles, the societal, every system within our system need to accept its role and responsibility. Yes. It needs to understand what they are doing to add to the gender-based violence. Correct. What they are doing to add to the situation. I know church pastors who tell the wives and husband they have to stay together because it is against the word of God, and the man is beating the living daylight out of the woman because divorce is against God.
And they remind her that she has to be submissive.
Of course.
To her husband. Correct.
One pastor went so fast to tell her, look at you, you're only wearing pants. I never see you in a skirt. That is what the pastor told the woman. I never see you in a skirt. You feel you in charge. That he started to talk to her in this way, as she said, you would swear that it was her husband. You see, and so when you look at all these different facets, are we in fact encouraging the gender-based violence? Are we encouraging the abuse? When the girls are plotting to say, we go do him this and we go do him that, and then we start to use the sex, right? We start to use the sex as the ultimate deal breaker as to whether or not I'm going to give him sex tonight or not give him sex tonight, or what we're going to do because of, you see? And so all of these things ties into the emotional illiteracy. Correct. And so it tells me that we need to teach people about emotion.
Correct.
Because when a person is emotionally dysregulated, correct, they act. And that is why I said to Trinidad Tobago on one of my Facebook posts, let us not make decisions in this emotion, because our emotion are skewed based on how you were socialized to understand man, to understand woman. This thing about all man bad, you swear all men in this country is out to kill women. It goes back to the question that the person posed earlier that asking about how do you stop painting man as a monster. Yeah. And I'm saying, but since when man is monster? Since when men are monsters? Correct. We create this misnomer that all men are bad and they're out there to kill, but that is not the case. We're supposed to say the man who did wrong, let us treat with him.
And I love that. I love
that issue.
I love the isolation of the issue.
Of course, that man or these people who are alleged to have done what they did to these people, and we could go all the way back to Akil Chambers, you know.
Yes.
Right? Let us treat with that issue and do not paint all men as evil and bad.
Yeah.
Because then when you do that, the next person who mentioned she treats her man bad. I mean, she treats her man good. And so why is he behaving that way? It goes back to that. If we say all men are dogs, all men are bad, then men, like normal human beings, will then retreat in a protective environment because they now need to protect themselves because, hey, men now are under attack because everybody's seeing man as dog and bad. But treat with the issue. Treat with the issue. Identify the issue. Put a name to the issue, a correct name, and then put proper solution. And Dellison, that is why I believe the 360 approach is the way to go, where we're looking at man, woman, and your environment. because men cannot operate by themselves, women cannot operate by themselves, and the system cannot operate by themselves. So the system has to work with the man and woman have to work with the system, and together, what we get is a system of change. But anytime we start to segregate, separate, and ostracize, we will continue where we are.
I love that.
What's this comment here first before I even say anything? Somebody say part 4 loading. Jesus, Father God, thank you. Dellison Charles, my former schoolmate, Hanif Benjamin.
Yes, sir.
Hanif, you would know Marble Boys Anglican. You know, no same school. Many of my father's sons are now 6 feet under, probably rotten, because many of them choose different paths. But then there are many of them who, from the same neighborhood, who have gone on to be extremely great men who have been outstanding to society, including yourself, Hanif. Don Polo, Coast Guard, is one of them as well, and we could go on and on and on. It clearly shows that, as you all rightfully said, that not all men are bad. And I want to say thank you very much for this opportunity. And I'm also going to mention that this is one of the most engaging from a commentator standpoint that we have had of 39 episodes to date. And I would like to continue the conversation, at least one per quarter, because I'll tell you all this, and for those who are joining us new, that many persons may ask the question, what is a national sporting organization doing speaking about social issues? And anyone who knows Prince Albert Churchill Edwards will understand that he, as a PE teacher, met with the community through sport. And that legacy has been passed on to myself, and as a leader of this organization, we see sport as a reflection of society. And thus, in terms of socializing, it starts with the young men playing football in the road, the young girls playing hopscotch, the young ladies playing maypole, and we in the girls' school, and the boys watching the girls going around the maypole. We learn to respect, honor, and cherish each other as one. And that's why we are here today. From 2020, there were 4 causes that we took up. We took up mental health, safeguarding children in sport, racial justice, and now gender-based violence. And it's not just about talk for us, it's about action. And with that being said, with such a great conversation, gentlemen, I'm asking that you all join with us in the next quarter, one Sunday in the next quarter, whereby we can continue to educate Trinidad and Tobago. And if there's a spin-off between both of you that you all could find a TV station to do something like this, please do. Because you all have been dynamic. You all have fed off of each other. And I believe that Trinidad and Tobago need to know more about this through what you all have said. Please, I implore you all, I ask you, I beg you all to keep in contact, and you all do more as regards to helping us be better people in Trinidad and Tobago. With that being said, I just want to take time to highlight some of the comments, and it's a lot. And I'm just going to take time to note some of them. Thank God for the good men in society. God bless you all. Stay good, bless as best as you can. True. One other comment here is passing these behaviors to generation. So true. You understand? And it continues on and on. It's just a lot to be. But thanks to everyone who took the time to really look in, chime in, and grow with us. So to you all, gentlemen, thank you very much. May God richly bless you all, and I pray that you all will continue to do the great work, and stay with us as we continue to strive. Yeah, so have a good evening.
Definitely.
Thank you so much
me.
for having me. Thank you so
All
much,
right.
Dellison. As always, a pleasure.
Hanif, it was a pleasure indeed. We will definitely reconnect. Thank you very much, guys.
All right.
No
Bye-bye.
problem at all.
See you all soon,
Bye-bye.
guys. Have
All
a
right,
good
no
one.
problem.
And there you have it, episode 39. An hour and 30 minutes of great conversation. And it's always great to be able to see men speak to these issues. And more so, I'm very proud of the great conversation that we had through our social media networks, YouTube and Facebook, where our audience, our listening audience, were able to contribute and chime in. With that being said, Futsal 868 Corner Talks is not just about talk. We are about doing. And as always, let us not forget the other issues that we continue to speak to and speak about. One of them, racial inequality. Let's have a look.
It is our responsibility
to commit to making a positive difference in our society.
Listen, read, be a standing voice against discrimination and injustices. I am Irene Marquez.
I am Dee.
I am McKenna.
I am Jariel McCullen, and racism
ends with me.
Racism certainly ends with me. And also, we would like you all to understand that we at Futsal 868 have decided to do the Futsal 868 virtual race challenge series, where we have as a 3-part series and we speak to the causes. For the first one, we are doing the run against domestic violence. And teaming up with us is the Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And we would like you all to take a look as we present our ad. Last but not least, next week, we have episode 40, where we speak to mental health and its relation to 2020. So on behalf of the Futsal Association of Trinidad Tobago, my name is Geoffrey Edwards, series moderator and president of the Futsal Association. I want to say thank you very much for being a part of our show once again. Do have a great evening and a blessed one.